Excellent. Coffee to go. So there you go. Which, by the way, I bet you didn't anticipate when you come to church this morning that you came into the foyer and it was like being at Denny's, right? Holy smokes, Batman. I think the kids are responsible for the hospitality table this morning. I almost went out with them because if that's how they started the day, imagine what's going to be going on now. So if you smell smoke during the service, don't be alarmed. Just saying. Hey, if you finished up, if you missed last week, you remember we finished our series 8 to 15, and the world really is smaller than you think. And we gave out our 8 to 15 card. I hope you have had an opportunity this week to be prayerful about your 8 to 15. Maybe you ran into some of them at work. If you missed a card last week, please make sure that you visit with me. We've got some extras, and that's on purpose, because this is kind of be our anthem. The world really is smaller than you think. And tomorrow you're going to be in the presence of part of your 8 to 15. And God's hard at work building a bridge back to people that he wants to reach, and he's given you, he's using you, he wants to invite you to be the bridge by which he reaches people that he's trying to reach. And on the other side, there's places for names. I've been jotting some of mine down, being prayerful this week about some of those. Some were easy, some have been hard. And I pray that you would continue to do that, because remember what the 8 to 15 is predicated on. That God has strategically and supernaturally put between 8 and 15 people in our life that he's trying to reach, and he wants us to join with him in helping transform their world, our world, together. It's just that simple. And so I pray that you will continue to engage and think through and engage with God about who your 8 to 15 are and what God's calling you to be a bridge by which people cross over and experience everything that it means to be Christian. And so today we're going to kind of talk just a little bit, and over the next few weeks actually, in this idea of leadership from the Christian perspective. Now sometimes when you talk about leadership from the Christian perspective, folks have a tendency to think that leadership isn't very spiritual. And friends, that's just a lie. If there is anything that's spiritual about spirituality, about Christian spirituality, it's leadership, and here's why. When you and I said yes to Jesus, when you went from being living in your own life, being complete control over it, doing as you chose to do, investing as you saw fit, and doing all the things that you were doing, and then somehow through the power of God, whether it was a life experience, whether you crossed far enough over the line that God snatched a knot in you and to get your attention, or whether the walls came caving in on you, that you had dug deep enough a hole and 1,000 of brick that started to fall on you, whatever the case was, where you went and you were awakened to the fact that, oh no, my leadership of my life is probably not that great. That point, friends, somewhere along the way, I got to think that it happened to you this way. And if it didn't, I hope it happens to you this way, honestly. Is at that point when you started to notice that, hey, maybe there's a better way to lead and live in life than the way I'm leading and living in life. And through this thing that we Methodists call grace, most of the time you knew somebody, they were a part of your 8 to 15, but you didn't know it, that you could look to, that had modeled, that had managed to be in similar situations, but had managed to make it through life and always do it with a smile on their face. Those resilient sort, you know? They're the people that most of us, apart from God, think about when we think about Pigpen. They travel around with the cloud of whatever following them around. And then there's these other ones like Charlie Brown, who they always manage just to come out on top, you know? Maybe you had somebody like that in your life, and I say all that to say this, is that leadership is one of the most important things in spirituality, and unfortunately we don't spend a lot of time on it. And so over the next few weeks we're going to talk about what it means to live, and to lead from a Christian perspective. Because the reality of Christianity is this, is that when you signed up, when you said yes, when you were awakened to the life-saving, life-changing power of Jesus, You signed up for leadership whether you read that part in the fine print or not. You signed up for leadership whether you read that part in the fine print or not, because here's the deal. Jesus invites us to look more like him day by day, to be more conformed to his image for the sake of others. And leadership is always focused on others. And so whether you knew it or not, when you said yes to Jesus, you signed up for spiritual leadership. And if you haven't said yes to Jesus, then this isn't a warning, but this is just to give you kind of the parameters to know that when you say yes to him, it's more than conversion and salvation that you're being invited to. It's leadership that you're being invited to. And it's leadership, if anything, it's leadership in the lives of your 8 to 15. It's leadership in the lives of your family. It's leadership in the places that you work. It's leadership in the life of your church. And leadership doesn't always mean the point leader, a positional leader, the people in authority. Leadership, friends, oftentimes means exactly what it means in the incarnation. It means to model what God expects for all people, so that they can look at you and say, I see other people in my life that look just as bad off as me. But then they can look at you and say, there's something about them, though. It's just a little bit different. Something about them that makes me want to have conversation with them. Because if being different was all there was to being leadership, I'd be king of the world. You would too. Well, it's not that. And so we're going to explore over the next few weeks. Like the church has been dealing with leadership, and we're going to explore it over the next few weeks. And we're just going to hit some high points. And today we're going to hit some high points about really from the book of 1 Timothy. Paul wrote to one of those people that had been following him. He had wrote to his protege that he had sent off to Ephesus to lead a church there. And Paul's writing to him, telling him, say, now this is what it's like to be in leadership. Because any of you who've got into a position of leading other people in life, you recognize, and I bet you'll recognize this, is that people don't always have a tendency to want to come along willingly. Sometimes they put up a fight. Sometimes they have differing opinions on what it means for us to move forward. And Timothy's experiencing some of this leading in the church, and Paul's writing to his protege, to his mentee, and says, listen, here's what it looks like to raise up leaders in the context of the church. And the whole letter is basically about that. And today we're going to mine one particular place from 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verses 1 through 13. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read it together, and then we're going to hit basically two lists. We're going to hit the first list, that's the knockout factors. And by knockout factors, here's what I mean. These are the things that disqualify you from leadership. These are the things that disqualify me from leadership. They're the things that have always disqualified people from leadership. And then we're going to hit the list that Paul gives in these verses of things that we're supposed to embody, emulate. And it's a list that you won't be unfamiliar with. Although Paul uses a little bit different language, he's basically talking about the same things when he talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, self-control, all those things. He's basically talking about them, but he's using a little bit different language in this letter to Timothy today that we're going to read. So again, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 through 13. You're welcome to pull it up on your electronic Bible if you want, just so long as you switch the ringer off. If not, it's on the screen, and you can come along with us here. So it begins this way. It is a trustworthy statement. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer or leader, some translations may say bishop or pastor if you're reading it, it's a fine work that they desire. An overseer, then, must be above reproach. A husband to one wife, temperate, prudent, respectful, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine. Or anybody want to pronounce that one? Which means? Don't be that, I guess, but because I have never seen that word in my life before. So I guess that's not saying much, though. But gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeps his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must be of good reputation with those outside the church, so that it does not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Deacons, which you move on and we talk about overseers, he strikes it in your scripture. Let me pause a minute. He separates it into two seminary word for the day, pericopes, 2 paragraphs. And he talks about overseers, bishops, pastors in the top, and he talks about deacons at the bottom. Now, if you're from a Baptist background, and I don't mean this jokingly, I mean this in all sincerity, if you're from a Baptist background, deacons are something you're familiar with. Deacons were kind of the organizational leaders of the local church. Here, when we're talking about deacons, we're not talking about that. And by the way, we don't lead that way in Methodism, but that's a different conversation. Deacons is the word diakona or diakonia, and it really means servant, literally translated. So when you see the word deacon here, just in your mind put servant in there. Servants likewise, deacons likewise, must be men of dignity, not double-tongued, or addicted to much wine. You getting a picture with that one? Or fond of sordid gain. That's a good translation. But holding to the mystery of faith with clear conscience, these persons must also first be tested. Then let them serve as deacons or servants if they are beyond reproach. Women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips, but temperate, faithful in all things. Deacons must be husbands of only one wife, good managers of their children and their own household. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a high standing and great confidence in the faith that is in Jesus Christ. So that's a lot of stuff to cover. Let me unspin one thing first. So Paul writes in a culture where men were preferred leadership, ladies. And I'm speaking specifically to you. Okay? Forgive our translation literally that it is directly, it's more male-oriented. Right? We're learning, we men. And this isn't to, what we're talking about today in spiritual leadership, ladies, more times than not, you're better leaders than we men are about these very same things that are on this screen. And so if you get the vibe that you've been kind of left out of the interpretation of the text, that's an ancient thing that's come in as a literal translation, but it does not preclude you from leadership in the 21st century church. In fact, it's never precluded you from 21st century leadership or 20th century leadership or 19th century leadership or 18th century leadership, but unfortunately we men had control. I'm just being gut level honest with you. And the reality is that you're quite capable of being leaders in the same way that Paul's talking about here. So I just want to dismiss anything. I have a daughter that I hope turns out to be a ruler of something. Like Kelly and I are raising a 21st century leader. And we're not raising her to follow behind somebody. We're raising her to be maybe equal with somebody. And ladies, you the same way. So I just need to dismiss that, because if you've never had anybody that is more passionate about your leadership than me in the local church. But let's check out for a minute what Paul said. You remember I told you we're going to do knockout factors. Let's talk about what Paul says are the knockout factors from leadership, right? Our translation said it was given, the person couldn't be given to much wine. Some translations say drunkard. You know, you can't be, in other words, Otis if you're going to be a leader. But let me broaden that a little bit, because if alcohol isn't your thing, then you'll have a tendency in leadership to say, well, I don't abuse alcohol. I enjoy it just fine. Yeah, I ran a Celebrate Recovery for years. Addicts are my friends. I know what we struggle with. I'm an addict too. But my thing just ain't substance abuse. So I know what it's like to have real struggles in life, and I bet you do too. Let's broaden this notion of being given to much wine or to being a drunkard. Here's the thing that Paul's trying to articulate. The basic theme or thread through this knockout factor is this, is that self-indulging in substance usages that are meant to help you escape or alter reality. Listen, if you got pain in your life, that's reality. And if you're medicating that to deal with it, you're altering reality. That's the whole point. But sometimes what Paul's talking about is when self-medication gets the best of you. And so in the 21st century world, he might say things like, if you're given to opioid addiction, if oxys are your friend, leadership probably isn't for you. So it goes beyond just having a drink is the point. If you have substance abuse issues or you're using substances to manage and help you cope or escape with reality, that's a knockout factor, Paul says, from leadership. Second one, he says, in some translations, he says violent. They're violent people. And let's broaden that one out just a little bit, because all of us know violent people. Some of us are violent people. It's just the reality. Like some of us were born as this one, men as us, men of war, head down, square shoulders. Like, you want to pick a fight? I'll indulge you. You know what I'm talking about. You know, some of you, it's hardwired into your DNA. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, and you're out at the red light banging on the window of their car. Not that I know anything about that, but let's broaden it just a little bit. And he says one of the knockout factors in 21st century leadership is you're a bully. You always got to have your way. And most of the time, this is what we say in the Deep South, they got a gator mouth. And you can finish the sentence, and you are, because I see you smiling. They're bullies. They pride themselves on running roughshod over the rest of us just to make sure that they get what they want. Paul says, that's a knockout factor from leadership. Third one he says, knockout factor, is they're quarrelsome. Let me define quarrelsome for you. You instigate unnecessary conflicts or fights. And it's kind of tied to the violent one, really. Other words, it looks like this, is that you might be the kind of person who is, that you just can't submit to a team decision. If you play on a sports team somewhere, they call this play, you go, I ain't running across the middle. Yeah. You're on a leadership team or something in your place of work, and your opinion isn't valued the most, and you take the passive-aggressive route. You just back away. You don't go into protest, but you just don't go along because it wasn't your opinion that people followed. Or it doesn't look like that. There's this spirit he's trying to articulate, this quarrelsome spirit, is that in us we search for a reason to be non-compliant every time. And I guarantee somebody's face popped in your mind. If it's mine, pray for me. Like, seriously. You have a quarrelsome spirit. Paul says it's the knockout factor. It's just not conducive to leadership. He said also that you couldn't be, the fourth knockout factor, a lover of money. In other words, greedy, or able to be influenced by the offer of money. So in other words, when people show up at your door knocking and say, hey, if you come work for me, I'll pay you twice as much. Good luck, God bless, here's my 2 weeks. You go right on to the other job. Sometimes that's fine. That's just climbing up the ladder. But if it's always, if the work isn't any different, kind of what Paul's talking about, if the work isn't any different and the only thing different is the pay, Paul says that you got to work through that. That articulates for us that we might have an issue with loving of money. He also said that you couldn't be, fifth knockout factor, slanderous. This one you've heard about your whole life. You've been around the church. Gossips. And it's oftentimes characterized by this. It's characterized by the overwhelming need to know about everybody else, but never the corresponding courtesy to talk to anybody else. Let's say it's a knockout factor. So if you don't, it's like going straight to the source, going to the spring of the river and finding out where the water comes from, instead of hearing at best second, maybe third, probably fifth, eighth hand. Well, we think it comes from over there. That's what he's talking about in being slanderous. It's a knockout factor in leadership. He said also, number 6, being brand new to the faith. This one's kind of hard because we always want people who are new to the faith to come into leadership, but this one's kind of hard for the fact that you don't have failure, spiritually speaking, to be mature enough to lead in the context of spirituality. That's what he's talking about. Number 7, double-tongued. The ancient translation is basically a modern version of a people pleaser. He says that's a knockout factor. And then number 8, he said knockout factor is to have an unruly family. An uncontrollable, some places would say spouse, uncontrollable kids, family, that kind of thing, because the notion was, as we read there, that if the home is uncontrollable, how could you lead other people outside the home? That's what Paul was talking about. And so those are the knockout factors, and here's the reality. And I got to go hard so we can get the last ones in for the actual standards. But here's the reality. Each of us at some point in life, and probably now, demonstrates one of those knockout factors. Every one of us in here probably, if you're honest. Right? And that's the beauty of following Jesus, is that this isn't about being perfect, and it doesn't mean that you can't demonstrate some of the knockout factors. It just means that they can't be the dominant characteristic in your life. In other words, if people know you as a gossip, then that knocks you out of leadership. And so long as these are the dominant, if you and I experience any of these, if they are a dominant characteristic in your life and personality, that disqualifies it, knocks us out of leadership in life and in spirituality. But the good news is that Jesus is in the business of requalifying people like me and you. If you read the New Testament, he had a ragtag bobtail gang of 12 fishermen, thugs, tax collectors, thieves, all kinds of stuff, that he's in the business of requalifying people who have let life and let themselves disqualify them from leadership. And so if you find yourself with one of these dominant characteristics, Jesus has a way of being able to restore your mind, your heart, your soul, and your habits and attitudes if you'll give yourself to him. And that's what we're doing together. We're giving ourselves in Christian leadership to Jesus so that he can continue to conform us to his image for the sake of others, so that our leadership might look more like the leadership of Jesus. It might look more like the standard of living that Jesus says. And so let's hit real quick of what that standard looks like from Paul's perspective in our text today. So if those were the knockout factors, here are the standards of leadership, spiritual leadership, that Paul gives us. Number 1, he said, you have to be above reproach. And again, this isn't about perfection so much, but this is just about making sure that when you learn, in other words, let me say it like this. No one should give themselves to leadership who doesn't put into practice the things that they learn through the study of Scripture. He's talking about being above reproach, being clear and having integrity, putting into practice the principles that we learn in Scripture, living them out day to day. Paul says that's what it looks like to be above reproach. Number 2 says faithful to their spouse. And I know that one said wife, but like I said earlier, we're broadening it out a little bit. It says spiritual leaders are faithful to their spouse. In other words, they love, honor, and, yes, obey each other. It goes both ways. I've done some weddings from time to time, and one lady told me one time, said, I'll say whatever the vows are, but don't you put that obey part in there, because I'm not saying it. I said, okay, but I'm going to put it in his. She kind of pulled back just a little bit. What? Why would I ask him to obey you if I ain't going to ask him to obey the other way too. You know, you and him and you. Like this is equal characteristics, in other words. And when Paul invites us to be faithful to our spouse, he means loving one another on the same grounds in the same way. And yes, for us as men, that means obeying the wife. Is what it is. And so that's what he invites us to in faithfulness for spiritual leadership. Number 3, he says sober-minded. That's the translation I use. And here's what it would say. You remember Jesus says that you don't throw your pearls before pigs because they'll tear them all to pieces, and they'll tear you all to pieces too. In other words, he told the disciples when he was sending them out to evangelize that I'm going to send you, you got to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. It's what we're talking about in being sober-minded, being tough-minded and tender-hearted at the same time. In other words, spiritual leadership means you're able to make hard decisions and that hurt people sometimes. And you're able to hurt with the same people in the same way that are hurting because of those decisions. That's what spiritual leadership looks like. It doesn't mean you don't make hard calls. It means you make hard calls because they benefit everybody. And when it hurts people, you hurt along with them as well. That's what he invites you to. Being sober-minded. 4th, he says you're self-controlled. In other words, you lead yourself well. You endlessly pursue understanding what makes you tick. And for those of you that we've talked about values and strengths, that was what we're trying to do, and some other things, is figure out what makes us tick, what makes us go. Because it's only when we know what makes us tick, when the opportunity to get out at the red light and start banging on somebody's window wells up in you, that you can recognize that and squelch it and stay in the car. And over some period of time, learn to pray instead of want to go be violent. That's spiritual leadership. And that is being self-controlled. And that, friends, is a monumental task. It's a lifelong task to know yourself that particular way. Number 5, he says, be respectable. And that means, in our context, speaking honestly, being real, not a fake person, and being appropriately transparent about your personal life, particularly for us as Christians, about our failures. Just being respectable. We don't have it all together. We mess it up about as many times. Like I'm hoping, I keep messing it up because I figure one of these days if I get all the failures out of the way, the only thing that'll be left are successes. Congratulations, you've made it to the basement, and the way up is the way out. You know, that kind of thing. That's the theory I'm living under, I guess. So we be respectful. Number 6, we're hospitable. We treat others not the way you learned it. Treat other people the way you wish to be treated. Because, friends, I think that's part of our problem now. We treat people the way we wish we were treated. Hospitality is about treating other people the way they want to be treated. Hospitality is about being others-focused, not me-focused. How can I treat you like I want to be treated if you don't even know if you like me or not? What sense does that make? I'm not even sure I like me on some days. So hospitality is about treating other people the way they want to be treated. Number 7, he says able to teach. You can convey these same standards in an intelligible and meaningful way in terms that other people can live and duplicate them in their lives. Number 8, you're a capable manager. It's what he was talking about a bit about being a home manager, is that leaders give responsibility and manage for results, friends. Managers ensure, among other things, that others are taking the necessary steps to realize the intended results. It's what you do as parents, right? You give things away, and then you expect and inspect that your kids do the things that you gave away to them. That's the same thing we do in spiritual leadership. That they're well thought of. Number 9, not perfect but likable. Not perfect but likable. Leading in the pattern of Jesus doesn't mean for us, friends, that we're perfect. It means we're likable, right? You remember from the New Testament. Everybody, the people loved Jesus. The religious folks hated his guts. This is not about being liked by everybody. Spiritual leadership is about being likable. You have control over if you're likable. You do not have control over whether other people like you. That's leading spiritually after the pattern of Jesus. And that's what Paul invites us to. Being well thought of by people. And last one, as we prepare to sing this morning, and this is kind of a list day, we run them all down, is this. The last one, number 10, is that being a spiritual leader, by way of implication, means that you're following Jesus. For it would be impossible to be a spiritual leader without a relationship with the leader of all leaders, without the God of all creation being part and parcel of your relationship. And so if you find yourself struggling in this notion of leadership, of spiritual leadership, it's predicated on giving your heart, giving your life, and pursuing Jesus. And in fact, you're 8 to 15. They're waiting on spiritual leaders. They're waiting on people to point to the bridge and say, Jesus, is this a way? I've been in this hole before too. Come on. I can show you the way out. Friends, everything that we talk about is built part and parcel on top of being a leader after the pattern of Jesus. And it's built on not just knowing it in here, but living it out right here. By the people you call, by the way you hug them, by the conversations you have, by the dinners you have, by the events you attend, by the way you don't react to bad news, by the way you do react to bad news, by the way they see you love them. Friends, your 8 to 15 are waiting. And Jesus continues to invite you to follow his pattern as a spiritual leader and help lead other people on this journey we call Christianity as we sing together this morning.